course, so in this video, we are going to be doing something slightly different to what we usually do on this channel. Obviously, at the moment, we're in kind of quite strange times, which means that a lot of teachers are having to adapt and rethink the way in which they usually give lessons. So I just thought I'd do a video on how I'm rethinking and how I'm adapting the way we should give lessons, talk through some of the technology which I'm using. Perhaps it can give you some inspiration for how you can incorporate this technology into your own lessons. But if nothing else, it might just be interesting to see what I'm doing and just sort of see how other teachers are adapting to the crisis. So let's have a look and see what's going on with the technology behind me. So the first piece of technology, which is actually central to this operation, is this piece of hardware here. This is the Blackmagic Design A10 Mini. Now, it costs about £300, which I appreciate is quite a lot of money, but this is really what allows me to do everything which I do here. It makes everything really easy. I don't have to worry about external hardware or anything like that. It's all built into this box. Effectively, what it does is it takes in 4 HDMI inputs into the back, and then just allows me with these buttons here to switch between those different HDMI inputs. What it then does is it outputs both a HDMI and a USB output. Now I'm using both, but you can just use one. The HDMI output comes to this. So this here is just what allows me to monitor what is going on with my screen. Okay, so I don't have to rely on a laptop all the time. I can just have a little monitor here and I can see what I'm doing and make sure it all looks good. Now, if I am actually going to record a lesson as well, I can record on the Atomos. So I've got an SSD in the back, so it does allow me to record. But if I'm just delivering a lesson, then I'll just use this to see what's going on my screen. So see what my students are seeing. So the first visual device that I use to capture myself on is this. So this is the Canon EOS 80D. This is what I usually use to record all of my lessons on. So it's usually stuck on a tripod in the middle of the classroom. Now, I've just done a couple of things to make it useful for live streaming. Number one, I've changed the lens over. So you can see it's a 24mm lens, which means it's a nice wide lens, and it means that it frames me nicely in the shot, and it means I can move around a little bit. The other thing with this is that it's an f2.8 lens, which just means that the background is nicely blurred and I'm nice and sharp in focus. Now, I've done a couple of things with the Canon actually. So first of all, I've changed the mode over. So ordinarily, I would record in manual mode and then I can set my shutter speed and my aperture and my ISO nicely. Because I'm just using this as almost like a slave device, which is then coming into the Blackmagic, I just switch it over to bulb mode. That just locks the mirror up and it just means that there's a nice continuous feed which is coming off of the Canon. Now, if you notice with the Canon, they've got all of this information around the outside. Now, ordinarily, if I'm recording on here, it wouldn't be that much of an issue because all of this information would have been removed by the Canon anyway. But because it's coming out of a HDMI output, it means that all of this information will also be recorded on my live stream. Obviously, I don't want that. So the way to get around it is just by pressing on the back of the camera, the info button. If I press the info button, all of that information disappears, which means I get a nice clean output. Now you notice that actually, there's a rectangle here as well, which is clearly not what I want, okay? So in order to get rid of that rectangle, if you just come to the side of the lens, just switch it from autofocus, which is what that rectangle means, it tells you the area which is being autofocused, and switch it to manual focus, then all you can literally do is just use the dial on the front of the lens and just autofocus and just manually focus me back into shot. There you go. Now it's also quite nice to have the manual focus going as well, because it means that if I move around a little bit, I'm not going to have any issues with that camera going out of focus now, because I'm going to remain relatively in the same place each time. Okay, so that's a really cool feature. Now the next visual device that I use is this. So this is the GoPro Hero 5. And you can see all I've done is I've just hooked it up to a microphone stand, and then I've just had a tripod head which was lying around the place, which I've put on the top here. Now again, HDMI output's coming out here, and I'm also charging it off of the USB port, so it doesn't waste the battery. Now what I use this camera for is mostly for doing calculations. So if I'm working through a problem in class, what I've noticed, if I'm standing in front of a class of 30 people, is that some people are really not that confident with using this calculator. And you can see why. Like, there's lots of buttons going on. So when I say, can you stick this into your calculator? A lot of people go, well, actually, I'm not that confident. And it's quite difficult to show people how to use a calculator in front of a class of 30 odd people. Obviously, if I've got this set up now, it's not an issue anymore, because you can see that on the screen here, here, I've got the calculator here, so it means that I can just switch between my inputs and I can show people how to use the calculator really nicely. Another reason why I might want to have an overhead camera, for example, if I actually want to write things on a bit of paper, perhaps I might want to use statistical tables or a formula sheet, again, I've got that overhead camera there, which is really, really handy and useful. So my next visual device that I use is this. So this is the Microsoft Surface Pro. At the moment I'm just running OneNote on here and I've kind of cleared the screen up a little bit. So it just allows me to write on the screen. Okay, so it just allows me to write on the screen and you can see that my students will also see me writing on the screen as well. So this is really, really useful and obviously I can change pen colours. The other advantage of doing it on here rather than like I say on a bit of paper is that after the lecture I can make all of my notes available both as a PDF file, a OneNote file, a web page file, and it means that all of my students then will have access to the notes which we went through in the class, which is really, really useful. So my other visual device that I use is this. This is my laptop. So again, it's hooked up via the HDMI output. What this just gives me is more flexibility when I'm doing lessons, just have that second screen here. So for example, at the moment I've got GeoGebra set up, so I don't have to kind of keep flicking between the different windows on here. I can just leave this open as a whiteboard and I can have this open with the relevant thing that I want to show on the screen here. I may also want to have the formula sheet open and direct students to a particular formula on the formula sheet. So it's just really useful and handy having that other sort of screen just to flick between on the A10 Mini. Now you notice here that this is a bit of a cluttered screen. So what I can do is if I come down to the taskbar, I can hide the taskbar down the bottom, so this black bar down the bottom. And the way to do that is just simply by right-clicking, going to taskbar settings, then you'll notice there's a couple of options. You can either toggle it off on the desktop mode or the tablet mode. Well, we're currently in the desktop mode and I reckon you probably will be as well. So if I just toggle that off, you see the taskbar down the bottom just disappears. And of course, if I want to bring that back, I can just hover over it. Now what that just gives me is a slightly cleaner output on here. And of course I can go into full screen mode on my relevant desktop browser to hide all of the gubbins along the top as well. So I just have a nice clean output coming to my students, which is really, really handy. So in terms of audio, I have one microphone. This is the Rode NT1A. It's a very affordable microphone. You can see it's a condenser microphone, which means it's good quality. I've got the pop filter on the front, which just means that my hard syllables will be kind of filtered out, so it'll be a slightly better sound quality. Then all that's happening with this is I've got an XLR mic coming out the bottom, so an XLR mic cable coming out the bottom, and then this is coming directly into this. So this is the Zoom H6. Now I can accept up to 4 inputs into the side via an XLR cable. It's also got an inbuilt microphone which I can swap out and change the capsules over. And I can change all of the levels on here. Now this provides me with the phantom power that I need to provide this. So if you don't know what phantom power is, effectively if you've got a condenser mic, it needs to be powered. It's not a passive mic. So this will provide me with that power nicely. Now I could also, if I wanted to, record all of my audio onto this device. But instead what I choose to do is use the line out cable and plug it directly into the back of the A10 Mini. So then I can switch my A10 Mini on, then I can change my levels on here, which is really, really nice. So basically everything is coming through the A10 Mini. Now there are some other really cool features with the A10 Mini. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's plenty of videos out there that talk you through them. But the number one feature that I use most often is this, which is picture in picture. Now at the moment it's off, but if I switch it to on, what it will basically do is take the input which is coming through feed 1, which is my Canon, and then what it will basically do is put me in the corner of the screen. So it means that if I switch between my different inputs, it means that I will always stay fixed in the corner of the screen. And of course, if I use these controls here, I can change my location. So for example, if I need to have access to the top right-hand corner, I can move me about into any of the 4 corners, which is really cool. Now there is also an option in here with the, if I have a green screen set up, to actually use a chroma key, so it'll basically have a green screen effect, so just basically be my little head, and all my background will be gone. But again, it's kind of a really, really cool feature which I use, but I'm not currently using that. The other feature which is really good with the A10 Mini is the option for fade to black. So let's suppose I'm recording my lesson or live streaming my lesson and something goes drastically wrong and I just need to cut all of my feeds. Well, if I press my fade to black button, what you can see is that the entire feed will disappear. So my students will effectively just see a black screen. So it's kind of like a get out of jail free card. And if something goes drastically wrong, it's always nice to have that button there, which just sort of cuts the feed, and obviously I can bring it back again when I'm ready. So that's a really useful feature. So how do I actually go about live streaming my lesson then? Well, I live stream my lesson using Zoom. So if I open up Zoom on my laptop, I do run it on my laptop, okay? You can see it's open up here. Now, all I'm literally doing is I'm using the webcam output, the USB output from the Blackmagic, and plugging it into the side of my computer. And what that means is that my computer will see the Blackmagic as a webcam. So rather than having to faff around with trying to share my screen on the tablet, I've noticed that if you try and share your screen on Zoom, it hasn't got a very good refresh rate. So I think it records sort of every third of a second or something, which means that the footage can be quite laggy at times. By coming in as a webcam input, it's just a slightly higher quality input coming in. Now, the only trouble is with this laptop, because I've got quite a lot going on, it hasn't got a very good video card on here. And I'm also recording, and I'm trying to stream my lesson at the same time, so it's quite a lot to ask of this laptop. So what I do instead is I use my phone as a host. So I literally just go to join a meeting. I join it as a participant first of all, so I don't connect my audio and I turn off my video. I put in my meeting ID, which I've got here. And then I literally just click join a meeting. And then what should happen is that I will go through the meeting room of the video. And actually this would be a good opportunity because if I click admit, sometimes it's a bit laggy. Okay, so if I come to here, it kind of takes a little while for it to load up and you can see, there you go, so it's in there. Now what this means now is that I don't have to worry about having Zoom open on this laptop here because I've got it open here so I can monitor what's happening here. But what I can also do, because I have students and nearly always students are late, then I can say, well look, AKP, I'm gonna make him a host. Okay, so I'm gonna go to more and I'm gonna go to make host. Now what this means is that I don't have to control anything from this laptop now, okay? I've got everything on here. So any private messages which come through, anybody that comes through late, I can just go through participants and then I can admit them from this phone, but you notice it doesn't affect what's happening on this laptop. So I'm still recording on this laptop and I'm still live streaming from this laptop. Now actually you'll notice that there's another problem here. Because my stuff is coming through in a webcam, you can see that my screen is up here, but it's up here on the top, which means that not everybody is going to be able to clearly see that. Now, ordinarily, that would be a problem, okay? Because by default, Zoom only shows the screen of whoever it thinks is talking. So to get around that, again, I can control it from my phone because this is now the host. If I click on the screen which I'm live streaming from, which in this case is Alexander Partner, and if I go to Spotlight Video, then what that means is that regardless of who is talking, this screen will always be shown. Okay, so this screen will always be shown regardless of who is talking. That's a really, really good feature, which I think. And you can see that as I switch the different inputs on my Blackmagic, you can see that it's changing on here. And obviously I can change the picture in picture and it changes live. But what's really good about this is that there's no lag. So if I'm writing on the screen, you can see it writes in real time, which is a really, really important and good feature. But then that means that actually I don't even have to have this screen open. I can go to GeoGebra, have this screen open, and then it's still going to be shared to all of my participants because it's running in the background here, okay? So it's just basically now used as a separate screen, which is really good. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit more of an idea about how I'm going about live streaming and recording lessons for my students. Now, I do not claim by any means that my videos are amazing quality because of this equipment. But for me, it doesn't really matter too much because it's more about the content that I produce. At the end of the day, as long as I'm explaining things in a clear way and I'm presenting things clearly, that's all that matters. And just for me, using this equipment helps me to produce the content that I'm doing. Now, I've talked quite a lot about this thing, which is the A10 Mini. I strongly recommend if you can get hold of one. It completely helped me with how I'm presenting that content and made my life a lot easier. I should just mention that Blackmagic have just brought out an updated version of the A10 Mini, which is currently on pre-order, called the A10 Mini Pro. Now, what that enables you to do is it makes live streaming a lot easier. So there's actually a built-in button on the switcher, which allows you to live stream straight from there. But you can also, by plugging in an external USB hard drive, you can also record directly from the switcher. So actually, this is now becoming a much more powerful bit of hardware, which you can use, and it makes your life, particularly if you're recording lessons and things like that, it makes it a lot easier. It will be a little bit more expensive than the current A10 Mini, but it's well worth checking out if that's something you're interested in doing. So I always think it's nice to kind of share how other people are doing things, and you know, even if you're just interested and you don't get anything away from it, I still think it's a nice thing to do. But hopefully you kind of get a bit more of an insight, and maybe it's given you a few ideas for how you can incorporate these into your lesson.